I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington.
From the atomic holocausts that surely shall be.
And a major city yet to be determined in Russia.
I wondered as I read that story, so filled with pathos, what had brought him to this sorry state. I discovered it in the Journal of Discourses, in a talk given to the saints in this same Bowery the year before by George A. Smith. I think if you bear with me for a minute or two, it is worth the telling to illustrate to all of us the need to be careful in dealing with small matters which can lead to great consequences. According to the account given by George A. Smith, while the saints were in far west Missouri, the wife of Thomas B. Marsh, then president of the 12, and Sister Harris concluded they would exchange milk in order to make a little larger cheese than they otherwise could. To be sure to have justice done, it was agreed that they should not save the strippings to themselves, but that the milk and strippings should all go together. Now, for you who've never been on a farm around a cow, I should say that the strippings came at the end of the milking and were richer in cream. Mrs. Harris, it appeared, was faithful to the agreement and carried to Mrs. Marsh the milk and strippings. But Mrs. Marsh, wishing to make some extra good cheese, saved a pint of strippings from each cow and sent Mrs. Harris the milk without the strippings. A quarrel arose, and the matter was referred to the home teachers. They found Mrs. Marsh guilty of failure to keep her agreement. She and her husband were upset. An appeal was taken from the teacher to the bishop, and a regular church trial was had. President Marsh did not consider that the bishop had done him and his lady justice, for they, that is, the bishop's court, decided that the strippings were wrongfully saved and that the woman had violated her promise. Marsh immediately took an appeal to the High Council, who investigated the question with much patience. And, says George A. Smith, I assure you they were a grave body. Marsh, being extremely anxious to maintain the character of his wife, made a desperate defense, but the High Council finally confirmed the bishop's decision. Marsh, not being satisfied, took an appeal to the First Presidency of the Church, and Joseph and his counselors had to sit upon the case, and they approved the decision of the High Council. This little affair, Brother Smith continues, kicked up a considerable breeze, and Thomas B. Marsh then declared that he would sustain the character of his wife even if he had to go to hell for it. The then president of the 12 apostles, the man who should have been the first to do justice and cause reparation to be made for wrong committed by any member of his family, took that position. And what next? He went before the magistrate and swore that the Mormons were hostile toward the state of Missouri. the affidavit brought from the government of Missouri an exterminating order, which drove some 15,000 saints from their homes and habitations, and some thousands perished through the suffering, the exposure consequent on this state of affairs.
I believe most of us are familiar with the sad account of Thomas B. Marsh and his wife Elizabeth. Brother Marsh was one of the first modern-day apostles called after the church was restored to the earth. He eventually became president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. While the saints were in far west Missouri, Elizabeth Marsh, Thomas's wife, and her friend, Sister Harris, decided they would exchange milk in order to make more cheese than they otherwise could. To be certain all was done fairly, they agreed that they should not save what were called the strippings, but that the milk and strippings should all go together. Strippings came at the end of the milking and were richer in cream. Sister Harris was faithful to the agreement, but Sister Marsh, desiring to make some especially delicious cheese, saved a pint of strippings from each cow and sent Sister Harris the milk with no strippings. This caused the two women to quarrel. When they could not settle their differences, the matter was referred to the home teachers to settle. They found Elizabeth Marsh guilty of failure to keep her agreement. She and her husband were upset with the decision, and the matter was then referred to the bishop for a church trial. The bishop's court decided that the strippings were wrongfully saved, and Sister Marsh had violated her covenant with Sister Harris. Thomas Marsh appealed to the High Council, and the men comprising this council confirmed the bishop's decision. He then appealed to the first presidency of the church. Joseph Smith and his counselors considered the case and upheld the decision of the High Council. Elder Thomas B. Marsh, who sided with his wife through all of this, became angrier with each successive decision. So angry, in fact, that he went before a magistrate and swore that the Mormons were hostile toward the state of Missouri. His affidavit led to, or at least was a factor, in Governor Lilburn Boggs' cruel extermination order, which resulted in over 15,000 saints being driven from their homes with all the terrible suffering and consequent death that followed. All of this occurred because of a disagreement over the exchange of milk.
Travis Wayne Goodsell. I've done the background history of Thomas B. Marsh's excommunication and how the church has lied to us. And I had wanted to do this kind of a clip, or a video, but finally got around to it now. As both President Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson demonstrate the use of misinformation in the church to get Mormons to conform and comply. And that it's a very disturbing act. If you notice, President Gordon B. Hinckley refers to George Albert Smith. His talk was given April 6th, 1856. And so I would think that Mormons would fact-check their presidents, especially now after Monson repeated it, to find out exactly what happened, to confirm that it's true rather than just automatically believe. Mormons claim they have a spiritual witness that the presidents of the church are true, and that makes them vulnerable to misinformation and abuse by the presidents of the church, that they go into a faith crisis when it directly affects their lives. As long as it doesn't affect their lives, they can continue on in their delusions. But once it affects their lives, all of a sudden faith crisis appears. This is the danger of not having a knowledge. And the church, of course, pushes for spiritual witness rather than pursuit of knowledge. George Albert Smith was a member of the Quorum of 12 Apostles and had been in the first presidency under Brigham Young from October 7th, 1868 to September 1st, 1875. And so it's after the talk that he was bumped into the first presidency. There's probably some deaths that occurred that required it also. Predecessor, Heber C. Kimball. It looks like Heber C. Kimball had died. And so George Albert Smith was the one who replaced him. And then John W. Young is the successor. And it was Joseph Smith. Wow, he wasn't even involved. And he couldn't have been called. Holy crap. This just gets worse. Because I think Joseph didn't get out until May or June. Hold on. Okay, April 16th. Okay. No, it could be true. April 16th, 1839 is when Joseph and Smith and his companions were permitted to escape custody while they were being escorted to Boone County. Smith fled across the border to Illinois, Missouri, where Missouri would spend several years attempting to apprehend and extradite Smith. Okay. We still would have to check to see if George Albert Smith was in Illinois at the time. They don't go into that great of a detail. And so we'd have to search the Joseph Smith papers to find this. And yeah, there still could be bombshells, but 10 days later, yeah. But it is after the Mormon War, and it is after other things that Joseph is said to have done by George Albert Smith. Let's see. He's the son of John and Clarissa Lyman, who was brought up in the Congregational Church. There's always a bombshell. Always. For every single sentence, there's a bombshell. And if you're new and you have no clue what I'm referring to, oh my God. Yeah, I know. They don't. Oh my God. Always a bombshell. Always. Always, 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 always. I won't get into it because we're supposed to discover Thomas B. Marsh. But this helps to illustrate the problem with Thomas B. Marsh and the misinformation. George Albert Smith is a Congregationalist, or was originally. He was brought up in the Congregational Church. Congregationalist. His first cousin was Joseph Smith. Oliver Cowdery, or William Cowdery Jr., is also a cousin to Lucy Mack. They were Congregationalists. The Smiths were Congregationalists, but you will not find it for Joseph Smith's family or for William Cowdery's family. Only for George Albert Smith. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand about the contention over the view of the Hebrews by Ethan Smith of the Congregationalist church that the Cowderys went to. And you don't have a clue about Nathan Wood, who came in before 1900 in that area where that Congregationalist church is, and started a branch off Congregationalist church because he had been excommunicated from the Congregationalists, and started the New Israelites, of which comes Jewish mysticism with the Tree of Life and Hebrew and Revelation and prophecies of the latter days. And Justice Winchell, who came in and joined the church and taught how to divine and to forge metals. They purposely leave this out. Oh my God. They do not want you to know this information, and they made a mistake, and now that I've exposed it, the church is now going to have people remove this from Wikipedia under George Albert Smith. Oh my God. This is horrifying. Oh dear God. But yeah, this is part of the cover-up, guys. If you're naively thinking that the prophets are true, they wouldn't lie to us because you got a spiritual witness, you just got slapped on stage of the Oscars. But not for saying something stupid about Will Smith's wife, but for being ignorant. Oh man. Dear God. So anyway, can I still read from this distance with the small print? I might have to have my head removed from the screen while I read this. It's the actual talk that he gives that both Hinckley and Monson referred to and quote from. You'll instantly recognize some problems. I would hope. There were two sisters wishing to make cheese, and neither of them possessing the requisite number of cows. They agreed to exchange milk. The wife of Thomas B. Marsh, who was then president of the 12 Apostles, and Sister Harris concluded they would exchange milk. In order to make a little larger cheese than they otherwise could, to be sure to have justice done, it was agreed that they should not save the strippings, but that the milk and strippings should all go together. Small matters to talk about here, to be sure. Two women exchanging milk to make cheese. Mrs. Harris, it appeared, was faithful to the agreement and carried to Mrs. Marsh the milk and strippings. But Mrs. Marsh, wishing to make some extra good cheese, saved a pint of strippings from each cow and sent Mrs. Harris the milk without the strippings. Finally, it leaked out that Mrs. Marsh had saved strippings, and it became a matter to be settled by the teachers. Notice both Hinckley and Monson say home teachers. Why would they say such a thing? Well, they're pulling what's called an anachronism. They're making Mormons in the audience believe that the home teaching program had been in existence for way back then. Joseph Smith established it. Under ministering in Wikipedia, ministering is the term for Christian service given to fellow congregants known as ward members within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Prior to April 1st, 2018, a somewhat similar program within the church was termed home teaching, block teaching, and ward teaching. So when did it originate? History. Home teaching had been introduced to the church by Harold B. Lee. As part of the priesthood correlation effort. The program took effect on January 1st, 1964. They had ward teachers prior to it, but they don't talk about the history of the ward teachers. But George Albert Smith only says teachers. Not ward teachers, not block teachers, not home teachers. Both Hinckley and Monson pulled an anachronism, because there's a scripture that explains what actually was the case under Joseph Smith. And all priesthood leaders and holders know this. And yet, Hinckley and Monson, speaking to the priesthood brethren on both occasions, used home teachers. Not established until 1964, was it? They didn't use the prior word of ward teachers, which the church doesn't want us to know when it started. But this was the original with Joseph Smith. This is what was when George Albert Smith is telling us in 1856. Section 20. And this section is gone over and over and over and over from the time I entered into the Aaronic priesthood, clear through my mission and into elders' quorum. This is the most repeated section in priesthood, whether Aaronic or Melchizedek, because it goes over our duties. Verse 53. The teacher's duty. It's the Aaronic priesthood teacher's quorum. That's what George Albert Smith was talking about. And it's not the home teachers. The home teachers is a Melchizedek priesthood function that was created later. The presidents of the church, Hinckley and Monson, pulled an anachronism on the priesthood. An anachronism is where you place something that began at a certain point further back before it existed. This is what you use for scripture identification of when it was created. So if you impose Trinity Jesus of Constantine onto the scriptures, you have now aged the scriptures post Constantine's Nicene Council. Because before the Council of Nicaea in 325 CE, AD, whatever you understand it as, Jesus did not exist. So who was it that came to Joseph Smith again? So the teacher's duty is to watch over the church always. And these were adults back then, not children. I still need to find out when the first child was put into a priesthood office of the Aaronic priesthood. I'm willing to bet it was not during Joseph's time, even though children are allowed to be baptized because of Sidney Rigdon's Campbellite Baptist origins, with his unique flavor to it. which you can find at the end of the Book of Mormon, because Sidney Rigdon's the major author of the Book of Mormon, by the way, not Joseph with his rock and a hat. This is another problem that ex-Mormons likewise get sucked into, with the misinformation from the church. But I'll cover that in a bit, although I should wrap this up as quick as I can, because I gotta go running. Otherwise I'll have to come back and do another segment. Is to watch over the church always, and be with and strengthen them, and see that there is no iniquity in the church, neither hardness with each other, neither lying, backbiting, nor evil speaking. That is why George Albert Smith says that the two sisters went to the teachers. It's also, and see that the church meet together oft, and also see that all the members do their duty, and to take the lead of meetings in the absence of elder or priest, and is to be assisted always in all his duties in the church by the deacons, if occasion requires. But neither teachers nor deacons have authority to baptize, administer the sacrament, or lay on hands. They are, however, to warn, expound, exhort, and teach, and invite all to come unto Christ. Every elder, priest, deacon are ordained to the gifts and callings of God, and ordained, blah, blah, blah. That needs to be understood in the context of George Albert Smith's talk, that purposely was misled by Hinckley and Monson as presidents of the church, because they were trying to manipulate the priesthood. Anybody who would be gullible enough to believe them automatically without knowing the truth of what happened. And I think I'm going to end up taking longer. So we'll finish with this. Okay, where was teachers? There it is. They began to examine the matter according to Doctrine and Covenants, section 20. And it was proved that Mrs. Marsh had saved the strippings and consequently had wronged Mrs. Harris out of that amount. Well, this looks bad for Mrs. Marsh. I'm sure George Albert Smith is telling us the truth. He would never lie to us. An appeal was taken from the teacher to the bishop, because there are appeals required. And why the bishop? Well, because the bishop is over the Aaronic priesthood, section 20. And a regular church trial was had. President Marsh did not consider that the bishop had done him and his lady justice, for they decided that the strippings were wrongfully saved, and that the woman had violated her covenant. What kind of penalty covenant was in existence during the time George Albert Smith was giving this talk? For those of you who went through the temple prior to 1991, we all know the answer. Marsh immediately took an appeal to the High Council. Oops. He just exposed himself as a liar, pants on fire, once we realize the truth, that I'll get to either in this segment or the next. But this is the proper process. Who is the High Council? Well, obviously it's the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, Travis. Or maybe it's the stake High Council. Yeah, you do not know, and I probably, yeah, it's been filed away. It doesn't have chart in its thingy. It's been a while since we typed in chart. See, I noticed very few Mormons have come to my video about the church not being Christian. Nope, it's not labeled as chart either. Okay, well, I'm not going to search for it. The organization under Thomas B. Marsh had the High Council on the administrative side. There was even elders on the administrative side. The missionary side was the Quorum of the 12, with elders who served as missionaries, as well as 70 who served as missionaries. Completely separated functions. And the Quorum of the 12 were not allowed in a stake of Zion. It wasn't called wards. They were stakes. And from the Joseph Smith papers, Joseph Smith, when giving them their licenses and talking further beyond what we have available in section 107, was talking to the 12 and the 70 specifically, not the others. That's why nobody else was listed. But Brigham Young took advantage of that. But now we have the Joseph Smith papers, and so now we're able to learn the truth. If only the church prophets would tell us the truth, but they still don't, and Mormons like me end up finding the truth and exposing it, and the church wants me dead, and so on and so forth. And I'm going to have to do another segment now. But the Joseph Smith papers reveals the truth about what just slipped my mind. High Council. Now, that Joseph Smith specifically told the 12 and the 70, you are not allowed where there is an established stake of Zion. Only for conferences were they brought into a stake of Zion where a conference is being held. Otherwise, they have to go establish stakes throughout the world. That's their job. There is no other job for them. They don't have trials of Mormons. They don't exalt themselves. You stick with your duty. You said duty. And so you need to know this if you're going to defend the church. And you can't. Joseph you can defend, but you can expose the liars in the church. And under chart, yeah, I do have my lunar eclipses chart with the deaths of presidents of the church. I intended to do a separate video about how, because Joseph Smith was framed, therefore Brigham Young and his successors all died under lunar eclipses in the exact same manner that they murdered Joseph Smith under a lunar eclipse. Deuteronomy 19 for false witnesses. And so, yeah, understand that the High Council is what you now believe is the quorum of the 12 apostles. And George Albert Smith was put into the 12 apostles. He knows the difference. But Hinckley and Monson deceive. But they do say the High Council. And so we're led to believe, well, it's the stake High Council. Not understanding how stakes were different than our stakes. Who invested the question with much patience, and I assure you that they were a grave body. Marsh being extremely anxious to maintain the character of his wife. Yeah, Martin Harris also, the story about him blames the wife for the loss of the 116 pages. They love to blame women for what they never did. As he was the president of the 12 apostles. Now you understand why Brigham Young brought him into the first presidency? And a great man in Israel made a desperate defense, but the High Council finally confirmed the bishop's decision. Here it is. Marsh, not being satisfied, took an appeal to the first presidency of the church. Did they think that we wouldn't find out this information? That we wouldn't know about Liberty Jail? And Joseph and his counselors had to sit upon the case. And they approved the decision of the High Council. Did he? Did he now? So here's the intent of his deception. This little affair, you will observe, kicked up a considerable breeze. Now, and Thomas B. Marsh then declared that he would sustain the character of his wife even if he had to go to hell for it. The then president of the 12, the man who should have been the first to do justice and cause reparation to be made to the wrong committed by any member of his family, took that position, and what next? He went before a magistrate and swore that the Mormons were hostile toward the state of Missouri. That affidavit brought from the government of Missouri an exterminating order. Really? That's what you're going to call? That's what you're going to claim, huh? Which drove some 15,000 Saints from their homes and habitations, and some thousands perished through the suffering the exposure consequent on this state of affairs. That's why Brigham Young exalted you to counselor, huh? Do you understand what trouble was consequent to the dispute about a pint of strippings? What is he trying to do? What is his real intention? Yeah. Liar, liar, pants on fire. And so, on October 19th, 1838, the day after Galatian was burned, on October 18th, a group of Mormons entered Daviess County and engaged in the looting and burning of non-Mormon settlements, including Galatian. They're not going to talk about it here. This is the Mormon War. What was the cause of the Mormon War? Why did a group of Mormons enter Daviess County? What was going on in Daviess County? I've done this video, so I'll just summarize it for you. There was an election being held in Daviess County. Joseph Smith was in Kirtland. Joseph Smith was not present. These Mormons called themselves Danites. They went to Daviess County to overthrow the election. Sound familiar? In case you didn't know, January 6th, Mormons were involved in that too. Yeah. It got so bad that those group of Mormons, Danites, went to the sheriff and to the judge and forced them to sign that Joseph Smith did it. Joseph Smith was in Kirtland. He was not in Daviess County. Why? How? How do I know this? Joseph Smith Papers has documented evidence of Joseph Smith being in Kirtland during that day. There is no way during that time, unless you're going to pull an anachronism and give him a car, that he could have reached Daviess County within a day. It's too far away, even by horse. These are the kinds of things you need to do when you're doing research. And I am horrified that no historian doing history research on the church has figured this out, so that we get this crap on Wikipedia. A company of about 80 of the Mormons, commanded by a man fictitiously named Captain Fremont, David W. Patton, marched to Gallatin. They returned and said they had run off from Gallatin 20 or 30 men and had taken Gallatin, had taken one prisoner and another, and joined the company. I afterwards learned from the Mormons that they had burned Gallatin, and that it was done by the aforesaid company that marched there. The Mormons informed me that they hauled away all the goods from the store in Gallatin and deposited them at the bishop's storehouses at Adamon-Diamond. He spells Ammon with an M-O-N. And then supposedly the next day after, Orson Hyde left the association of the church. Remember I talked about that the other day? Did you listen to the end? To find it? To hear it? Did you watch any of my other older stuff to find it? Why did John Taylor become the president of the church the year before Brigham Young died? Why was the order changed? Cha-ching! All because of Orson Hyde saying, no, Adam is not our Heavenly Father, Brigham. And so, yeah. And so, do you see this? He has been told by Mormons. And having been told only by Mormons, Marsh drafted and signed a legal affidavit against Smith on October 24th, 1838, which Hyde also signed, in addition to reporting on the organization of the Danites and on the events in Daviess County. Marsh reported rumors that the Danites had set up a destroying company, and that if the people of Clay and Ray made any movement against them, this destroying company was to burn Liberty and Richmond. He further stated that his belief that Joseph Smith planned to take the state, and he professes to his people to intend to take the U.S. and ultimately the whole world. What have I been talking to you about the whole time? And the church wants me dead for it. We are in that time period that they have been plotting for 200 years. Let's go to section 117 to see how Joseph Smith considered the Danites. Let my servant WWIII be ashamed of the Nicolaitan band. Well, that's the Nicolaitan band, Travis. That's not the Danites. And all of their secret abominations, and all of his littleness of soul before me. He was a Scottish Rites Mason, WWIII was, before it was done away with in 1826. Nicolaitan comes from the Book of Revelations. Joseph Smith is pulling a coding using Revelation as his reference to code this. The church claims they decoded everything. Well, oops, in verse 8, they have the plains of Olaha Shinha. Yeah, I'm sure that was the actual name. This is the Danites. And lest I bring this up to your attention, as I will, seriously? 19 July 1840. But before this time shall be, the fulfillment of the prophecy in section 101, starting in verse 43, I emphasize verse 51. These who are now my friends, and Brigham Young and his quorum of 12 were in the audience, shall become my enemies, and shall seek to take my life. And there are those now before me, Brigham Young and the Quorum of 12, who will more furiously pursue me, more diligently seek my life, and be more bloodthirsty upon my track than ever were the Missouri mobbers. You say among yourselves, as did them of old time. He doesn't tell us who. Is it I? And is it I? But I know these things by the visions of the Almighty. Mark chapter 14, the Last Supper of Jesus and the 12 apostles. Joseph knew the Danites and condemned them. And Thomas B. Marsh believed the word of other Mormons who were Danites lying to him, mingling truth with lie, because it was their intention to overthrow the United States and the world. That's the whole purpose of the Book of Mormon, is to warn us of the Danites who formed the great and abominable church with the death of the founding Mormon Christ, Joseph Smith. 2 Nephi chapter 3. The man like Moses. And from the great and abominable church will come another man like Moses, to be the top stone, as Joseph refers to it in that sermon. Why didn't Brigham Young publish it as a section in the Doctrine and Covenants? Do you see the evil that the church is covering up? Or are you still going to want my death to be more bloodthirsty upon my track than ever were the Danites to Joseph Smith? You have succeeded in destroying my life, but you have failed so far to assassinate me. But the church paid for the war in Ukraine, and the church is profiting from it. And they used that lie about Marsh. Because when was he excommunicated? That's what I was going to check. It's not closed up yet. Because of the lies that the Danites forced the affidavit of Thomas B. Marsh and the judge and the sheriff to cause the extermination order. Yeah, Joseph Smith was blamed, all right. Was sent to Liberty Jail. And Thomas B. Marsh, was excommunicated 17th of March, 1839. When did Joseph Smith get out of Liberty Jail? So who was excommunicating Thomas B. Marsh? He left the church. This story did not happen. It was Thomas B. Marsh learning of the Danites. And he said, I want no part of this church. And was led to believe that it was Joseph Smith in charge of them. when it was Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball who were in charge of the Danites. Because what happened after Thomas B. Marsh left? Brigham Young held an excommunication of others because they voted to have Brigham Young be the successor in the presidency of the president of the 12. Just a president, no counselors. Notice section 107, also talking about administrative functions, tells us why Brigham Young was voted by his quorum, assigned by Joseph Smith, to be the president. Verse 21, of necessity there are presidents or presiding officers growing out of or appointed of or from among those who are ordained to the several offices in these two priesthoods. Each quorum is to vote for their president. That's why Brigham Young held a vote in his quorum of the 12 when Thomas B. Marsh left, and Brigham Young was voted as the president. Brigham Young then excommunicated Thomas B. Marsh, 17th of March, 1839. Again, I refer you to false witnesses in Deuteronomy 19 and the punishment for those who are false witnesses. The significance of the day and the significance of Relief Society being on that exact same day in 1842. I have the video. You can see it on the homepage. It's got Battlestar Galactica reboot. The name. And there's also the one about his actual birthday, prophesied, the man like Moses. It's amazing how Joseph Smith, I am literally amazed, because there's no way, that just freaks me out. But nonetheless, how the president of the church was supposed to be done was not done. Brigham Young chose not to follow the scripture when, after Joseph Smith was assassinated by Willard Richards, one of the 12. Oh, Joseph Smith was right, huh? I shut down the video and then saw that I had the note that I was intending to give this until distractions of bombshells. What do my bombshell or eyes do appear but bombshells everywhere are near. Thomas B. Marsh. See, they're saying it's a weird tactic that the church is using, because George Albert Smith is setting it up to show that the proper protocol in the church was done all the way up to Joseph Smith, and yet Joseph Smith even turned on Marsh's wife. That causes a dualism there that is very disturbing, because George Albert Smith is saying Joseph Smith is the prophet and you can't go against the prophet. You have to obey, you have to conform, you have to comply. Even if it's a little matter, you must obey, conform, comply. And at the other end, Joseph Smith is the bad guy. He's a mean, heartless, cruel dictator. And when you realize that that had nothing to do with anything, it was the Danites with that election voter fraud overturn that started the Mormon War by the Danites, who intended to overthrow the U.S. and the world. You see Brigham Young exalting himself This is the coup in the church. They got rid of Joseph, locked him up in jail wrongfully. They got the government to have an extermination order of the Mormons. As Brigham Young, in the midst of this contention, rises to the presidency of his Quorum of 12, which are only for missionaries. They're not supposed to be doing anything in any stake of Zion. That's not their duty. What is Brigham Young doing leading the church in Joseph's absence? Well, we know why. Joseph Smith calls him Judas. In 1839, when Joseph Smith got out, there's another Joseph Smith Papers bombshell. Joseph calls Brigham Judas, calls Thomas B. Marsh a good man. They don't mention the names. Willard Richards is the scribe. What they did to Thomas B. Marsh was chastised and condemned by Joseph Smith when he got out and found out what they did to him. Does that sound like a president who sided against Thomas B. Marsh? Yeah. So you have to see the big picture. And unfortunately, Mormons and ex-Mormons will not. They choose their side. Whether they're ex-Mormon to say that Joseph Smith is the bad guy, or Mormon to say, yeah, you need to obey, conform, and comply to the leaders of the church. That's how it's viewed. Nobody cares to find out the truth. And the truth is going to murder us all, because the church paid for nukes, not just the war. A day that shall burn as an oven. And they, Joseph Smith, makes that difference. Them that, let's quote it. Then I gotta go around it. Joseph Smith history. Yeah, the days shall come that shall burn as an oven, for they that come shall burn them. The church paid Russia. George Albert Smith talks about doing business with Russia and China, by the way. They knew of those countries back then. That is the difference in the wording from the Malachi passage. Joseph Smith knew that evil people were planning and plotting to overthrow the world using Scripture to fulfill it. That's how evil they are. And the church paid Putin to do this. Joseph Smith knew it was going to be Russia. Ezekiel 38 says it would be Russia. Pat Robertson knows it's Russia. The Pope knows it's Russia. Biden knows it's Russia. Everybody knows it's Russia, except for the Mormons. Who are the suckers and losers. Who are going to be left neither root nor branch.